Naomi Carter, raised as a ward, not a true family member, she had privilege, education, and protection, but no recognition, no belonging. Everything seemed hers, yet nothing truly was, until one courageous choice changed her life forever, allowing her to step out of the shadows, claim her identity, and achieve her dreams. Before we move on to Naomi's story, tell me in the comments which state you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow's episode might be connected to your loved ones. Naomi Carter never felt like she fully belonged in the Rowe family home, even though she had lived there since she was a small child. She had never been called Elijah Rowe's daughter, only his ward. That title carried protection, but no warmth, and it came with rules she had learned to follow without question. Her earliest memories were of quiet hallways, polished floors, and the faint hum of office work coming from the rooms her guardians called design studios. She spent hours at the edges of meetings, listening to discussions about blueprints, contracts, and client demands. Everyone in the house knew she was there because of Elijah's promise to someone long gone, but no one spoke of that person. Naomi learned quickly that silence was safer than curiosity. The staff treated her carefully. Some were kind, offering extra help when she struggled with lessons in drafting or math. Others reminded her with sharp glances or quiet words that she had no claim to the legacy of the family. Her place was always between two worlds, close enough to witness wealth and influence, distant enough to never share it. Elisha Rowe never addressed her mother. Naomi never asked, though questions occasionally formed at the edge of her mind. She knew better than to press. Sometimes she would find him in the study late at night, staring at the city skyline from the tall windows, his face calm but his eyes far away. Naomi understood, even as a child, that there were truths he could not speak, and she learned to respect that distance. Education was the gift he gave freely. Tutors arrived in the early mornings, guiding her through complex subjects. She learned architecture, engineering, and business strategy, yet every lesson was paired with a subtle reminder this knowledge was hers to use, but the recognition that could follow belonged elsewhere. Naomi grew skilled at nodding politely, listening carefully, and remembering that sometimes the best way to survive was to be grateful without expecting anything in return. On her 12th birthday, Elijah handed her a small leather-bound journal. He said quietly, "Write down your plans. One day, you'll build more than I could ever imagine." She accepted with a nod, sensing both encouragement and distance in his words. The journal became a place for her thoughts, a safe space to claim a future she could not yet announce. By the time Naomi reached her teenage years, she had internalized the rules of the house: protection without belonging, care without affection, and opportunity without recognition. She understood that her life would always be defined by what she could achieve, not by who would claim her. And so she began to learn how to stand on her own, even under the same roof as the man who had raised her. As Naomi grew, the house became both classroom and cage. Lessons arrived in the morning, but they were never limited to books. Elijah believed knowledge and behavior were inseparable. She learned mathematics and design, but also how to enter a room quietly, respond politely, and never ask questions that might reveal her vulnerability. Every action, he reminded her, carried weight, even if no one officially noticed her. Family dinners were lessons in observation. Naomi sat at a smaller table, close enough to hear conversation, but distant enough to remind her of her place. When guests arrived, she was introduced simply as Elijah Rowe's ward. The words were polite but empty, and Naomi had learned not to search for warmth in them. Her place was acknowledged only as a formality. The Rowe children, distant cousins who spent most of their lives abroad, treated her differently. Some ignored her entirely, others seemed polite but calculating, testing whether she would overstep boundaries. Naomi learned early that appearances were as important as skill. A smile could protect her. A misstep could erase years of effort. Elijah rarely spoke of her mother. Occasionally, Naomi would catch him in the study late at night, holding a letter or a photograph, his expression unreadable. Sometimes she felt the weight of unspoken history in the room, loss, regret, or perhaps guilt. But she knew better than to comment. Elijah's silence was deliberate. She was meant to learn patience, discretion, and the unspoken rules of family life. Tutors and occasional visitors noticed Naomi's talent. She absorbed knowledge quickly, drafting intricate designs on small pads of paper while others debated larger projects. Elijah observed quietly, nodding occasionally, correcting mistakes without drawing attention. Praise was rare, but it mattered when it came. Naomi learned to measure success not by applause, but by the subtle approval of the man who raised her. Evenings often ended with Naomi alone in her room, reviewing sketches or copying notes from her tutors. The leather journal from her 12th birthday had grown thick with plans, reflections, and observations about the family she lived among. In it, she documented her ambitions, quietly constructing a future she could claim entirely on her own. Through these years, Naomi learned a truth about family life in the Rowe household. Love was measured by guidance, not affection. Protection came in rules, not hugs. Recognition was offered in careful increments, never freely. And while she had all the tools to succeed, her identity was always provisional, acknowledged, respected, but never claimed outright. By her 16th birthday, Naomi had internalized these lessons. She moved through the house with confidence and caution, balancing gratitude with self-preservation. The Rowe home had given her more than most children could hope for, but it had also taught her the weight of absence of acknowledgement, of inheritance, and of the simplest words, "You belong here." By the time Naomi turned 18, the Rowe household had become both familiar and confining. She had grown tall and capable, her hands steady with pencil and ruler, her mind fluent in design and construction. Yet despite her accomplishments, her place in the family remained defined by what she was not. She was talented, educated, and disciplined, but she was still the ward. Elijah remained distant, careful not to show favor publicly. At formal events, he introduced her the same way he had for years. "This is Naomi Carter, my ward." Colleagues and clients accepted the phrase politely, but Naomi knew it carried meaning. It separated her from any claim to the family name, the firm, or its reputation. She had protection, opportunity, and access, but no recognition. The Rowe family had rules for everything, including gratitude. Naomi learned to nod, to accept guidance, and to respond politely when others praised her work. Private approval came sparingly, a quiet word in the hall, a slight nod during a meeting, but it was enough to encourage her to continue. She understood that her survival in the house relied on awareness, patience, and careful obedience. Her formal education had prepared her for a career, but her upbringing in the Rowe home had prepared her for life in quiet observation. She could read people, sense their expectations, and anticipate their reactions. This skill was crucial in a family where affection was measured by correctness and where opportunity could be withdrawn without warning. On her 18th birthday, Elijah gave her a small envelope. Naomi recognized the weight behind the gesture immediately. Inside were documents granting her access to independent funds and professional resources, along with letters of recommendation that could open doors at firms across Atlanta. "You'll always have my support," he said quietly, avoiding her gaze, "but it's time to make your own way." Naomi accepted without comment. She had learned long ago that asking for more than was offered was pointless. The envelope was both freedom and a challenge, a way to step into the professional world without the Rowe name, without the protection she had known all her life. She understood what he meant. She had the tools to succeed, but recognition would not be handed to her. She would earn it on her own. That evening, as she packed a small bag to move into her first apartment, Naomi reflected on the life she was leaving behind. The house had given her everything it could: education, guidance, protection,
But it had also reminded her constantly of her limits. She was grateful, but she was ready to claim space in the world that was hers to define. Elijah watched her leave, silent as ever. Naomi did not look back. She understood that some relationships were measured not by words or acknowledgments, but by the strength you allow yourself to build within yourself.
Naomi's first months outside the Rowe household were filled with both excitement and uncertainty. She rented a modest apartment in Midtown Atlanta, a space that was hers alone for the first time in her life. The quiet of the apartment was unfamiliar, but it allowed her to organize her plans, her work, and her thoughts without anyone overseeing her every move. Starting at her first architecture firm, Naomi quickly discovered the difference between guidance and independence. Colleagues were polite but unyielding. Clients did not know her skill, only her reputation as Elijah Rowe's recommended talent. That title opened doors, but it also reminded her constantly that she was not recognized on her own merit. She had to prove herself at every turn. Letters from Elijah were rare now. A brief email or note would arrive every few weeks, acknowledging her accomplishments but never overstepping into personal affection. Naomi appreciated the restraint, knowing that his support was a quiet promise rather than a conversation. She had learned long ago that gratitude did not require reciprocation, and independence often came with minimal guidance. Family life, as she remembered it, had prepared her for this. She could navigate hierarchies, anticipate reactions, and manage relationships without exposing vulnerability. These skills were invaluable in the office, where ambition and caution often clashed. Naomi quickly earned the respect of her team, not through charm, but through competence and reliability. Her work ethic became her signature, and clients began to notice her unique perspective on design. Despite her professional progress, Naomi felt the absence of emotional acknowledgement. Milestones like finishing her first major project or receiving praise from a client were privately satisfying, but they lacked the personal recognition she had never received from Elijah. She understood that her upbringing had trained her to accept this. Achievements were hers, but approval had always been controlled. On weekends, she returned to the journal Elijah had given her years ago. It remained a constant companion, now filled with sketches, project notes, and reflections on family, mentorship, and her own ambitions. Writing helped her process the gap between opportunity and belonging, between public success and private recognition. In time, Naomi began inviting a few colleagues into her home for small dinners. The gatherings were informal, filled with conversation about projects, city development, and career goals. They reminded her of family dinners at the row house, though here, she set the rules. She realized that she could create her own network, her own support, and her own place in the world. Naomi understood one thing clearly. Family, in its truest form, was not always about blood or title. Sometimes it was about the guidance that prepared you to stand alone and the choices you made once the protection ended. And now, for the first time, she was building that life entirely for herself. Naomi had grown comfortable in her independence, but fragments of her past continued to surface, reminding her of the life she had left behind. One afternoon, while organizing old papers from the row house she had brought with her, she discovered a folder labeled with her mother's name. Her hands hesitated before opening it, knowing that whatever lay inside could change the way she viewed both her upbringing and her mentor. Inside were letters, sketches, and early design notes that her mother had created decades earlier, some of which had clearly influenced projects attributed solely to Elijah Rowe. The handwriting was precise, confident, and full of ideas that had been quietly incorporated into the firm's legacy. Naomi felt a mix of pride and frustration. Her mother had been talented, yet the world had never recognized her contributions. She thought about Elijah, who had raised her and given her tools for life, but had also kept the past carefully hidden. She understood the reasons: protecting the family name, avoiding scandal, but the knowledge still stung. Naomi realized that while she had learned to navigate life on her own, there were pieces of her history that she had never been allowed to claim.
That evening, Naomi called her mentor, Marcus Hill, a senior architect she trusted. She shared what she had found and asked for guidance. Marcus listened quietly, then said, "What matters now is what you do with it. The past shaped you, yes, but it doesn't define the projects you lead or the family you'll create." The words resonated. Naomi spent hours reflecting on both gratitude and resentment. She owed Elijah for his guidance and the opportunities he had provided, yet she also recognized the subtle ways her identity had been suppressed. Family life had always been a balance of care and control, and now she had the chance to make her own decisions. Naomi began revisiting her current projects with renewed determination. She infused them with the creativity and spirit that her mother had passed down indirectly. Each design became both a professional achievement and a tribute to the family legacy that had been partially hidden from her. Evenings in her apartment grew quieter, filled with reflection rather than distraction. Naomi knew that confronting the past fully would require courage, honesty, and perhaps confrontation with Elijah himself. She was learning that family wasn't just about love or protection. It was also about accountability and the truths left unspoken. By the end of the week, Naomi felt a subtle shift within herself. She was still the same capable architect, but now she carried an added sense of purpose to honor the unacknowledged contributions that had shaped her life and to ensure that her own achievements would never be left unnamed.
Naomi had reached a turning point in her career. Her projects were attracting attention across Atlanta, yet the credit was still partially attributed to the firm rather than to her personally. Clients praised the designs, but when the accolades were spoken aloud, her name was often left out. It was a reminder of the careful balance she had learned to navigate: independence paired with restraint, talent paired with invisibility. The firm's partners treated her with cautious respect. Naomi understood that recognition came slowly and in measured increments. She had inherited none of the row name publicly, so every compliment carried an unspoken condition. She could achieve, but she could never claim full ownership. It was a lesson she had learned well in the Rowe household. Success and acknowledgement were not always aligned. Elijah remained distant yet observant. Occasionally, he would attend meetings or client presentations, nodding at her work without comment. Naomi could sense his pride, but it was never stated outright. That quiet acknowledgement had become familiar, a subtle way of showing support without disrupting appearances. She had long accepted that this was the form of connection she would have with him. At home, she shared her progress with Marcus Hill, who had become a close professional confidant. "You're building more than structures," he said one afternoon over lunch. "You're building respect on your own terms. That's rarer than most people realize." Naomi listened, appreciating his perspective. She knew the truth. Recognition without a name was bittersweet, but she had learned to value the growth and skill she was cultivating over public acknowledgement. Despite these successes, Naomi felt a lingering tension. Pieces of her past, her mother's legacy, her place as Elijah's ward, and the family history that had been withheld remained unresolved. Every new achievement reminded her of the family life that had both nurtured and constrained her. She understood that career triumphs could not entirely replace the acknowledgement she had never received at home. On weekends, Naomi revisited the journal that had been a constant since her teenage years. She wrote notes about projects, lessons from colleagues, and reflections on family influence. Each entry reinforced the lessons she had learned. Opportunity and skill were gifts, but they did not replace belonging or affirmation. She needed both to feel complete. By the end of the month, Naomi realized that she had grown in ways she had never anticipated. Family influence had taught her restraint, patience, and discipline. Independence had taught her initiative and confidence. And yet, she knew the journey was far from over. Recognition might come slowly, but she had the ability and resolve to shape her own legacy, even if the world only saw her as a ward for now. Naomi had been building her reputation steadily, but questions about her past and her place in the Rowe family still weighed on her. One quiet evening, she decided it was time to confront the truth she had avoided for years.
She arranged a meeting with Elijah in his office, the same room where she had spent countless hours learning the craft he had protected so carefully. She spoke first, her voice steady. "Elijah, I need to understand something about my mother, about why certain things were kept from me, why I was raised here but never fully acknowledged." Elijah looked at her for a long moment. He did not move, nor did he respond immediately. Naomi had learned over the years that his silences were deliberate, often more revealing than words. "Some truths," he finally said quietly, "could have caused damage to you, to the firm, and to others. I made choices I thought would protect you." Naomi listened carefully, her own feelings a mixture of anger, frustration, and understanding. She had been prepared for silence, but she had also hoped for honesty. "I understand protection," she said, "but I needed to know the truth at some point. I needed acknowledgement even if it came late." Elijah sighed, a weight she had never heard in his voice before. "I feared scandal. I feared losing everything we had built. But I realize now that shielding you in that way also deprived you of something important, your identity, your sense of belonging." The conversation continued, careful and measured. Naomi pressed for information about her mother's role in the firm, about decisions she had been kept from, and about moments in her childhood that had shaped her. Elijah answered with caution, admitting partial truths, revealing what he had hidden, and explaining his fears. By the end of the discussion, Naomi felt a complex shift within herself. There was no simple resolution, no sudden closure, but she had heard the acknowledgement she had longed for, even if it was delayed. She understood that family life was rarely perfect and that guidance often came with compromise. Leaving the office, Naomi reflected on the lessons of her upbringing. She had been given protection, education, and opportunity. She had been guided by someone who cared in his own way, yet she had also been denied acknowledgement and identity. The balance of care and omission had shaped her into someone resilient, disciplined, and capable. She returned to her apartment that evening, opening her journal. For the first time in years, she wrote not just about projects or ambitions, but about the conversation she had just had, recording the truth that had finally been shared. It was a moment of reflection, a moment of reckoning, and the quiet step toward claiming both her past and her future. After her conversation with Elijah, Naomi felt a weight lift, but it did not disappear entirely. She now understood the reasons behind her upbringing, the protection, the withheld truths, the careful shaping of her career. But she also realized that understanding alone would not define her life. She had to make choices for herself, without waiting for acknowledgement from anyone, even Elijah. At work, Naomi began taking on projects that challenged her in new ways. She designed not only for clients, but also for communities, focusing on spaces that would have a lasting impact. Each plan, each drawing, reflected both her skill and her personal vision. While she still respected the guidance she had received at the Rowe firm, she was determined to assert her own approach and build a reputation based on her abilities alone. She discussed her intentions with Marcus Hill, who had become both mentor and friend. "You've learned a lot from the Rowe household," he said, "but now it's time to apply it in your own terms. Don't let anyone else's legacy define yours." Naomi nodded, knowing he was right. Independence was not just about living apart or managing projects. It was about shaping a career and a life without reliance on someone else's name. Family, she realized, was not limited to bloodlines or titles. It could be formed through respect, shared values, and the people who supported you along the way. Elijah had given her education, opportunity, and protection. Marcus had offered guidance and perspective. Naomi could take these influences and combine them into something uniquely hers. At home, she reviewed her journal and sketches, considering the direction she wanted to take next. She began planning her first fully independent project, one that would carry her name alone. It would be a testament to the lessons she had learned, the people who had guided her, and the talents she had nurtured quietly for years. She also thought about Elijah. She no longer needed his public acknowledgement to validate her skills or her identity. She could appreciate his role in her upbringing without relying on it. Their relationship was complex, but it had prepared her to step fully into her own life. Naomi realized that choosing her own path meant accepting the past, learning from it, and then moving forward without looking back. By the end of a week, she had made a plan. She would launch her independent projects, establish her own reputation, and claim her place in the professional world. At the same time, she would continue to cultivate the personal relationships that mattered, those built on respect, mentorship, and shared values rather than titles or expectations. Naomi understood clearly. Independence was not a single act, but a series of decisions, each one affirming her ability to live life on her own terms. For the first time, she felt fully ready to take those steps. Naomi's first independent project was finally ready to be unveiled. It was a mid-sized residential complex designed to provide functional, modern living spaces while maintaining aesthetic balance. The designs were completely her own, inspired by her training and the lessons she had learned from both Elijah and her mother's hidden work. For the first time, her name would be on every document, every blueprint, and every public announcement. She scheduled a small presentation for city officials, clients, and a few trusted colleagues. Naomi had prepared carefully, anticipating questions, feedback, and scrutiny. Standing at the front of the room, she felt a familiar sense of pressure, the kind she had known since childhood, but it was tempered now by confidence in her own abilities. She did not need approval to validate her work. The plans spoke for themselves. Elijah attended quietly, choosing to sit in the back. Naomi noticed him, but did not allow his presence to affect her focus. Over the years, she had learned to navigate both acknowledgement and absence. Now, it no longer mattered whether he praised her publicly. His presence was simply a reminder of the guidance she had received and the complexities of the family life that had shaped her. The presentation went smoothly. Officials complimented the design, noting how the project balanced practicality and creativity. Colleagues asked technical questions, which Naomi answered confidently, demonstrating both her knowledge and vision. Marcus Hill, standing to the side, offered a subtle nod of approval. Naomi felt a quiet satisfaction. This was recognition earned through skill, preparation, and determination without relying on anyone else's name. After the presentation, Naomi returned to her apartment, reflecting on the journey that had led her here. She remembered the quiet hallways of the Rowe household, the rules and boundaries she had learned to follow, and the lessons about family, opportunity, and restraint. She had been prepared for independence, but she had also been taught patience, discretion, and careful observation, skills that had served her well now. Elijah called later that evening. He spoke briefly, acknowledging the success of the project. "You've done well," he said simply. Naomi thanked him, recognizing both the support behind the words and the distance that remained. She felt no anger, only clarity. The acknowledgement, though restrained, was sufficient. She no longer needed it to define her. That night, Naomi wrote in her journal, documenting not only the project and its reception, but also her reflections on family and identity. She realized that she had finally achieved a balance between the guidance of her past and the independence of her present. Her name, now firmly attached to her work, symbolized both professional achievement and personal growth. Naomi knew this was not the end of her journey, but it was a milestone. For the first time, she could claim her contributions openly and step into the next phase of her life, guided by her own vision and choices rather than the shadows of her upbringing. Naomi felt a quiet sense of accomplishment as she stepped into her office the morning after the project's official launch. The building plans lay neatly on her desk, each sheet marked with her name. It was more than a professional milestone. It was a declaration of identity. For the first time, she could look at her work and know it belonged entirely to her, just as she did. Over the past months, Naomi had learned to separate the guidance she had received from the Rowe Pharaohs from her own goals. She had respected Elijah's influence, absorbed Marcus Hill's mentorship, and studied the contributions her mother had made decades earlier. Each piece of guidance had shaped her, but none of it dictated her future.
She could now take what she had learned and define success on her own terms. The family dynamic that had once defined her life felt distant, but understood. Naomi no longer needed public acknowledgement from Elijah or the firm. She appreciated the lessons, the resources, and the protection that had been offered, but she also recognized the importance of establishing her own authority. Her independence had become both personal and professional, rooted in skill, resilience, and clarity of purpose. In her apartment, she reviewed her journal for the last time in its current form. The pages told the story of growth, patience, and quiet determination. They documented her journey from ward to independent architect, from a life shaped by a mission to one she controlled fully. She smiled softly, realizing that the journal had become more than a record of ambition. It was a map of identity, guiding her toward her own definition of family, work, and self-worth. Elijah visited briefly that evening, not to assert authority, but simply to acknowledge the result. "You've made something remarkable," he said. There was no pretense, no reservation, just recognition in its simplest form. Naomi nodded, grateful, but no longer dependent on it. She had learned that acknowledgement was meaningful, but it was not essential to her sense of self. As the city lights glimmered outside her window, Naomi thought about the future. There would be new projects, challenges, and opportunities. There would be professional debates, personal growth, and unexpected twists along the way. But she felt ready for all of it. The lessons of family life, guidance mixed with restraint, protection mixed with distance, had prepared her for independence, and now she could act with confidence, clarity, and self-determination. Naomi understood that her story would continue, but she would write it herself. Her name attached to her work and her achievements was no longer provisional. It belonged to her, fully and without compromise. She had taken the tools offered, the lessons taught, and the legacy inherited, and she had transformed them into her own life, her own family of values, and her own definition of success. For the first time, Naomi Carter felt entirely her own. She had learned to navigate family, mentorship, and identity, and in doing so, she had claimed herself. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching.